Another developing story that we're following. NBC News has confirmed that lawyers for Donald Trump are expected to fight a subpoena issued to former Vice President Mike Pence. The subpoena is related to special counsel Jack Smith's investigation into Trump's role on January 6th. NBC's John Allen joins us with more this morning. John, good morning. So what does Trump's legal team plan to do at this point?
Hey, good morning, Katie. According to a source familiar with the Trump team's legal discussions, Trump plans to intervene here, or attempt to intervene here, and challenge this subpoena to his former Vice President Mike Pence. This is not a terribly surprising development. Former President Trump has frequently tried to cite executive privilege, whether it's on Capitol Hill or in this case with the special counsel, to try to protect his communications with people in his executive branch. Traditionally, courts have given much more leeway to prosecutors with grand juries seeking information from the executive branch than they have to Congress seeking information from the executive branch. But even then, Trump was not able to protect a lot of his information from Congress. So, we'll have to see how this plays out. You're the lawyer, Katie, but for the moment, it's at least a temporary delay.
As a lawyer, I will say, John, the privilege belongs to Donald Trump in terms to invoke it. But do we have any word whether Pence is actually willing to comply, but just saying, you know what, Donald Trump's going to stand in the way?
Good morning, y'all. Good morning. Happy Sunday. I'm just chilling.
The Justice Department.
You're welcome to chill with me if you want to.
Basically voluntarily appearing before a grand jury, turning over information voluntarily. And at the end of the day, Pence, I think, required this subpoena, meaning he wasn't willing to do all that was asked of him without the Justice Department subpoenaing him and making that formal request and giving Trump the opportunity to try to intervene. This is not terribly uncommon. There are a lot of equities at stake here that are that go beyond just President Trump and Mike Pence personally, in terms of the institutional prerogatives of the presidency, the executive branch versus the judicial branch versus the legislative branch, at least as we saw it on the January 6th committee hearings.
NBC's John Allen, my friend, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Take care.
As we know, welcome back. Another showdown over executive privilege is brewing as special counsel Jack Smith forges ahead with his investigation into the 1/6 insurrection. Donald Trump's legal team is expected to fight Smith's subpoena for documents and testimony from former Vice President Mike Pence. This is not the first time Trump has tried to keep people silent. In 2021, he tried and failed to block the January 6th committee from accessing records related to his administration's actions surrounding the Capitol riot. Footnote, that was the case in front of the Supreme Court where Clarence Thomas was the only dissenter. Last year, a federal appeals court also dealt a blow to Trump's executive privilege claim, forcing Pence's former White House chief of staff, Mark Short, to testify before a grand jury about efforts to overturn the 2020 election. The judge ruled that Short likely has important information not available from other sources. There's also historical precedent working against Donald Trump. The Supreme Court ruled against President Nixon's executive privilege claim back in 1974, ultimately forcing Nixon to turn over the Watergate tapes. Joining me now is former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst Cynthia Oxney. Cynthia, good morning. I want to call it straight out of the gate. Does Trump win or lose this legal battle?
Oh, he loses. I don't think there's any question. Not only did he lose the archives case that you mentioned in Short, but he also lost Greg Jacob. He also lost Philbin. He also lost Cipollone. I mean, it's eventually going nowhere. The problem is that it is yet another delay tactic by Trump. But remember, there are a lot of things that Pence can testify to that have nothing to do with executive privilege. There are conversations with outside people outside the White House having to do with the pressure campaign on him, and whatever communications he had with people outside the White House, he could testify to that right away. But I do expect that the Trump people will make every effort to delay this, and then ultimately they will lose.
Cynthia, let's talk about those conversations Pence had with people outside the White House. Some of those conversations he put into a book. So let's talk about those conversations, because he included in his book conversations with Donald Trump in connection with the insurrection and efforts dealing with the 2020 election. That helps the government, right? It actually helps bolster the government's argument that these communications are actually not confidential anymore because Pence already shared them with third parties, right?
Well, yeah, everything that he has, because he's happily willing to waive everything when it comes to making money in a book, and then suddenly he wants to clam up when it comes to testifying, that of course helps the government. But the executive privilege argument, it's not owned by Pence, and interestingly, it's not even owned by Trump. It's really owned by the people of the United States and our republic. So there is a legal question on whether or not Trump can even assert executive privilege now that he's not president. And that hasn't officially been decided by the Supreme Court.
I've lost something.
But even if he could assert it, he should lose anyway because the information is so important to a pending criminal case. But so there are legal issues out there outstanding, but as we both, I think, agree, ultimately, Pence will have to testify.
And Cynthia, and to that finer point that you just mentioned, can special counsel Jack Smith make the same argument about Mike Pence that was made in the Mark Short case, which is Mike Pence is a central witness, a central figure who likely possesses valuable information others don't, and it's the only way for us to be able to get that information, and it's got to come from Mike Pence.
That's right, and that's right straight out of the language of the Nixon case, that there's no place else to go for this information in a criminal case. You know, he had several meetings with the president before January 6th and phone conversations on January 6th and before that are only he has that information. And we need that to know what happened on January 6th. And it's also, you know, there's also a whole list of questions which is really interesting, like why didn't he leave the Capitol?
Really? Why didn't he leave the Capitol? Well, it is what it is. Because they are so full of shit. Okay, y'all. Anybody out there? This is just what I'm doing. And I'm having a cup of Joe. Yeah. Putting on dinner for the night. I'm up. Gotta clean up some things. But I'm up. Have you had your cup of Joe? I know it's early on a Sunday. Yeah, I know. It's okay. Everything will be fine.
Pressure for him to leave the Capitol, which would have stalled the process, and he refused to get in that car and leave. Well, how did he make that decision? Who contacted him regarding that decision? What was the back and forth with the White House and the Secret Service about that decision? All these things are critical to understanding what happened that day. And
I want to switch gears, and yet it's completely related because I did drop that footnote in the introduction to your interview about Clarence Thomas. The Supreme Court justices reportedly failing to reach an agreement on an ethics code of conduct. You know, it's a question that keeps coming up after every controversy. A Washington Post article coming out recently, Cynthia, saying it's been going back for years. Why can this not get done? And frankly, should Congress step in and make SCOTUS have an ethical code of conduct?
I think the public pressure will require them to do it. There is a big legal question on whether or not Congress can force a code of ethics on the Supreme Court because they're a separate branch of government, and I think that's a real problem. But I also think that they need to have a code of conduct. There is a code of conduct for the United States judges. All federal judges have a code of conduct.
Yep.
And it does not apply to the Supreme Court, which quite frankly is ridiculous. It ought to apply. And we've had the real need demonstrated lately. Jenny Thomas is pressuring people to overthrow the government. And then Justice Thomas is ruling on cases related to that. There is the Roe leak case, and in the investigation, which was extremely weak and not done by an outside party, nothing ever happened, and they didn't pressure the justices or force them to sign statements. Justice Alito was credibly accused of leaking a prior case, and when he said, no, I didn't do it, there was no
Supreme Court
investigation, and that was
justices.
the end of the matter. They're going to have to become more transparent from not only disclosing more financial information, more complex information, and going all the way to, at some point, they're going to have to put a camera in that courtroom. I mean, who do they think they are? The American people deserve
Supreme
the
Court
right to
of the
see
United States.
They think they're the Supreme Court, but they think they're the Supreme Court from the 1700s. They are not. They're the Supreme Court in the 2000s, and we have every right to avail ourselves of the transparency of what's going on in that courtroom.
Exactly.
Cynthia Oxley, you always have the opinions that I think are ringing true. Thank you, my friend, for being here, and I hope you're doing okay. I do note, Cynthia, I'm hoping that your Florida home, which I know was devastated from the last hurricane, that everything's better for you.
Thank you. Nobody really needs a first floor anyway.
Oh gosh, Cynthia. Coming up, as we prepare to mark 5 years since one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history, Florida Republicans are trying their best to make guns easier to get. I'll speak to House Representative Jared Moskowitz. That's coming up next.
Oh, yeah.
Now back to our top story this morning. U.S. fighter jets have shot down a third aerial object in less than 2 weeks. The latest object was downed over Canada's Yukon territory. Here's what we know so far. The Canadian Minister of National Defense says the object was flying at 40,000 feet. The object was smaller than China's spy balloon, but potentially similar. Officials are still in the process of recovering the debris after the object was shot down yesterday. This latest incident put the United States and Canada on high alert. The U.S. military even temporarily closing to civilian planes the airspace over Montana.
Hello, y'all. Happy Sunday.
Y'all
Y'all know what I do. I'm just chilling.
Retired U.S. Army Colonel Jack Jacobs. Colonel, good morning. First, I want to get into the description of this object. Canada's National Defense Ministry says it's, quote, potentially similar to the Chinese spy balloon. If it is another spy balloon, how should the United States respond?
Well, we've already responded by shooting it down. I think some diplomatic efforts are probably underway right now to coordinate activities with the Chinese to make sure that they understand that the West is not going to put up with this stuff very much longer. We've already put economic sanctions on certain entities inside China. And this will continue and increase to the extent that the Chinese continue to do this. We have to remember that the majority of this stuff, perhaps all of it, originates from the People's Liberation Army.
Just having a cup of joe, y'all. And listening to the news that they always do. Although political. But here we are. Have you had your cup of joe?
In China, between the political apparatus
And I gotta clean out my kitchen too.
And the People's Liberation
So,
Army on the other,
sit tight, relax, listen if you want to.
over the West.
You know,
It remains to be
give me a
seen
like
whether or not
on your
those
way out.
pressures will actually erupt. But it's interesting to note that this all comes from the PLA, Katie.
So, Colonel, we've got 3 flying objects, one a confirmed Chinese balloon. We have this being downed in less than 8 days. Is it likely that objects like this have always been in the airspace over North America and we're just being more attentive to them now?
Yeah, most people you talk to who know what they're talking about say that that's actually the case. We do know that there were at least 3 that came over the United States during Trump's presidency. But there have been lots of them that we're going back into the records, and we'll probably determine that this has been a fairly regular occurrence for years and years. The relatively unsophisticated way to send spying equipment over a country. It's a Victorian era ploy, but in fact it works, especially when we're not paying very much attention to it, Kate.
So, Colonel, I mentioned earlier in the intro to your interview, it's not every day that you see the United States and Canada working together to shoot an object out of the sky. What does it mean for our national security, and how critical is it to have good relationships with our strategic partners like Canada?
Well, it's vitally important, and on the diplomatic side, we've been working on this sort of thing everywhere in the world, but particularly in the Western Hemisphere. What's interesting is that the entity NORAD, the North American Air Defense,
Willie Wilson is ready to take on the criminals. The city streets are not
Oh,
safe.
really?
Willie Wilson knows.
operation is a joint and combined organization with our services and Chinese, I apologize, and Canadian services working together to defend the Western Hemisphere. But this has been ongoing for a long, long time. NORAD's been in business for decades and decades, and is getting more sophisticated over time with the advent of more sophisticated technological means to detect and defeat intrusions into our airspace.
You mentioned a few minutes ago the Pentagon has said that China flew these spy balloons over U.S. airspace during the Trump administration at least 3 times that we know about. But Trump's former national security officials are saying they didn't know anything about them. So what could have happened here? One military official says that this could be a domain awareness gap. What does that mean, Colonel?
Well, it's very difficult to detect these kinds of aircraft. They have a low radar signature. They have almost no infrared signature. We have spy satellites over these areas, and they haven't been able to detect them with any regularity. They can be detected visually. Indeed, the first one that was shot down was detected from the ground, and you could see it if you had some good binoculars. So our problem is one of being able to actually see them, and they're extremely difficult to see, which would explain one of the reasons why the Chinese are using them. We have to get better at detecting these kinds of aircraft. This last one was very, very small, especially compared to the 200-foot tall balloon that we shot down a few days ago. But these packages can get smaller and smaller and smaller. And the smaller they get, the more difficult they will be to detect. We have to redouble our efforts to develop the capability to see these things as they drift over our airspace, Katie.
Colonel, quickly before I have to let you go, Canada is taking the lead to recover and analyze the wreckage of this object that was just shot down yesterday in that joint operation between the United States and Canada. How does that work in terms of the information share? Again, we have good relationships, courtesy of President Biden with Justin Trudeau at this stage. So is it just a straight and direct information share to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, it will be, because NORAD is a joint and combined operation. There will be 100% sharing of this information. There are American troops on the ground as well. I've been up in that area, particularly in the winter. It's extremely difficult. But once the information is recovered, it will automatically be shared by both commands, Kate.
Colonel Jack Jacobs, as always, we're grateful for your insight and your analysis, and we look forward to having you come back because, frankly, we just don't know more information at this time. But as it develops, we welcome you to come back and share that knowledge with us. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Ooh, hey, how y'all doing? Yeah. Just having a cup of joe and watching some news. That's it. Yeah, about to work on my second cup while I clean. And until then, it's what I'm doing.
17 injured. In the aftermath of one of the deadliest school shootings in United States history, Florida raised the minimum age to buy firearms from 18 to 21 years of age and imposed a 3-day waiting period for most purchases of long guns. But now, Republican state lawmakers are pushing a bill that would allow people to carry firearms without a permit or training.
Oh my
And
God.
currently, no background check is required
Damn.
when a gun is transferred between 2 private individuals. And that new law, it has the backing of Governor Ron DeSantis.
Of course.
The move comes as the Washington Post reports that DeSantis wanted to actually ban guns from his election night party at the Tampa Convention Center last year, but he wanted city officials to take the blame for the ban. According to an email from venue management, DeSantis, his campaign, will not tell their attendees they are not permitted to carry because of the political optics. The convention center ultimately rejected the request. For more, I am joined this morning by Congressman Jared Moskowitz, who represents the Parkland community. Congressman, thank you so much for joining the show. Let's start with this new effort to allow Floridians to carry firearms without a permit and with zero training. I don't see this legislation being stopped in Florida, considering the Republican supermajority that we have down here. But what should our viewers understand about its ultimate impact on everyone's safety?
Well, Katie, first of all, thank you for having me this morning. I'm about a mile away, less than a mile away from where one of the worst mass shootings in American history, one of the worst school shootings, happened right around the corner from my house. The school I graduated from, my 4-year-old at the time was around the corner from that school. At his preschool, went into lockdown and was put into a closet by a teacher, Jen Guttenberg, Fred Guttenberg's wife, when her daughter was killed. So she was protecting my son when her daughter was killed. And so,
Wow.
this is extremely personal to me, as you can imagine. What's happening in the Florida legislature now, what I've called it is I've called it political carry. Because quite frankly, it's all about politics. It's a solution in search of a problem. We had a concealed weapons permit process here in Florida. It had been working quite fine. There were no issues with it. If they wanted to try to speed it up, to try to make it more efficient, that's fine. But to try to get rid of it is just completely unacceptable. It's not going to help anybody. It's going to make matters worse. I do find it interesting, Katie, however, that they're not coming with open carry. And they're not trying to get rid of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas school safety law, which raised the age to 21, instituted red flag laws, which have been used 9,000 times since they put them there. And that's because those laws are working. So they don't want to say it out loud. But, look, they've had now 5 years to try to undermine a law that the NRA is still suing the state over. And so, that tells me that even they know that that law is good and it is working.
Jesus.
Congressman, all eyes are on Ron DeSantis and his possible presidential ambitions. I like to say Florida is the epicenter of all things crazy, so I feel like the U.S. looks to see what happens in this state. What do you make of this new reporting, though, that
one thing I always strive for when I do make
Okay. All right, so it's going to be the Wild Wild West in Florida. Ron DeSantis and his shitbag ass. Oh, you ain't even got to have nothing. I carry a gun, purchase a gun, nothing. Ooh, so sweet there in Florida, huh? Really.
DeSantis also wanted to blame the venue for the ban? Is this the kind of hypocrisy we can expect from the GOP's current golden child?
Well, listen, I think this is something that you've seen consistent, actually, with Republicans. This reporting went on several times during the Trump campaign, is that, they didn't want guns, and guns were not allowed into their venues. And listen, they may not want to say it out loud, but Republicans quietly know that there are several people out there, lots of people, okay, a significant amount that shouldn't have access to guns. And the reason why they don't want guns at their event is because they know it makes them less safe. And so, listen, it's nice that they said the part out loud, which is, we can't talk about it because obviously, it hurts our politics. But, this is so important, Katie, especially as we come on the 5-year anniversary of Parkland, which is, the lessons in Florida were this. We had a horrible mass shooting. Democrats and Republicans came together and passed one of the most comprehensive gun safety laws in the country. In fact, we raised the age here in Florida 4 years before New York and Rhode Island. And we were only like the 6th or 7th state to do red flag laws. And so every single solitary Republican that voted for that bill got reelected. And it was the majority of them because, as you know, they control the House and the Senate here. Additionally, Rick Scott signed that bill, and he became a U.S. Senator. So for all the Republicans in Washington who would like to keep kids safe in school and would like to make communities safer, but they're worried about the politics, the lesson in Florida is they can do both. They can keep the Second Amendment, they can make sure that we're not infringing upon people's Second Amendment rights, but at the same time, they can keep kids safe in school, they can make communities safer, and they will not pay a political price.
Congressman, you went from Tallahassee to Washington, D.C. As we mark the anniversary of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas shooting, my heart aches for Fred Guttenberg and the others that are the next of kin and the survivors. You know, the Gun Violence Archives reports that America has already seen 65 mass shootings this year. 65, and we're not even done with February. During a State of the Union address, President Joe Biden called on Congress to pass an assault weapons ban. What are the chances, Congressman, that Washington can do what you just talked about, that Florida was able to do? Take a divided partisan political process, but bring people together to be able to ban assault weapons.
Well, listen, obviously I'm for that. And look, in the gun violence movement, that clearly is the North Star, which is banning assault weapons. But there's a lot of stuff we can do on the way to that journey if we don't have the votes to do that, which obviously with Republican control of the House, it's very unlikely that we would get anywhere near that. But listen, red flag laws, which Congress passed, funding for last year in the last Congress, that was the first gun violence bill in 30 years. So breaking that logjam, again, showing people that we can work together, we can balance the Second Amendment with gun safety, and we can do it where people don't pay a political price. That's extremely important to show them that actually Americans, and we know this from polling, want to see more gun violence prevention laws. And so, look, I think that the argument to Republicans simply is this on raising the age to 21. If you look at all of these mass shootings at schools, an overwhelming majority of them are done by kids under the age of 21. And so the idea that a 19-year-old or an 18-year-old can't walk into a Hertz or an Enterprise and walk out with a rental car, because rental car companies and insurance companies have said they're too dangerous to drive a rental car. But the fact that they can walk into a gun store and walk out with 2 AR-15s, 250 rounds of ammunition, and body armor, it just doesn't pass the logic test. And so, that's what I want to talk to, members of the opposite party. It's not about taking people's guns away. It's about mitigation and it's about balance. We're not going to prevent everything, right? But we can't let this, you can't stop at all. We can't let that argument be the reason why we don't do more. Every little thing we do, Katie, will protect a life or 10 lives or 500 lives. And that's what people in the gun violence movement like Fred Guttenberg and Maxwell Frost and David Hogg, that's what we're all trying to do. We're trying to make it safer for kids. I mean, look, my 4-year-old is now 9. It's 5 years later. He doesn't remember, thank goodness, why he was put in a closet. I tell myself all the time, like, I'm so happy he was unfortunate, obviously during the unfortunate incident, I'm so happy he was so young, so I didn't have to explain that to him. But there are generations of children now growing up in school that have had to have that explained to them. What is the mental health cost to those children that have grown up now in a world where, somewhere deep in the back of their mind, they know that they're not safe in school?
I have an 8-year-old who's in 2nd grade, Congressman, here in Florida in the public school system. For her, these active shooter drills, they're still drills. We've been fortunate that it hasn't been reality, but because of the common sense you're talking about that you've taken from Florida to D.C., I'm grateful as a mom and as a Floridian. Congressman Jared Moskowitz, thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Katie.
Well, Florida and their governor, he don't give one shit. It's all political, y'all. It's all political. This coffee is great. What y'all cooking today? Let me know. Anybody out there? Oh, ain't nobody out there. Well, I know it's early, but this is what I do. And I have my cup of coffee, and then I do what I need to do, clean up. I get things together to, if I'm gonna cook, and I am gonna cook. I have a craving for something, yeah, I want to eat a nice dinner, and but I gotta also clean too. So That's a drag. So this is your governor of Florida, in Florida, DeSantis,
damage a lot of people with lies. And
who's
so we have a
letting
number of people
all
here
these
who are
guns.
well versed, either personally or professionally,
It's just
in
like,
the area of defamation law. And at the end of the day, what I think they fought for is to hold these big media companies accountable for their actionable lies. And, you know, it's one thing to say what you want and truth, and that's fine, and the truth isn't always comfortable. But when you're knowingly putting out false information,
like
indeed,
you
I'd
do
say
all
these
the time.
companies are probably the leading
Like your whole party
purveyors
do
of
all the time.
disinformation in our entire society right now. There needs to be an ability for people to defend themselves, not
Jesus,
through
he's
government
sickening.
regulation or restriction, but through being able to seek private right of action. So I'm going to introduce everybody.
He's
They're
sickening.
all
I can't
set.
stand him. he's taking African American studies out of the schools, out of the colleges. I mean, in the high schools. Like, God, the hypocrisy. It's unbelievable. Like, you don't want the white students to feel guilty or what? It is fucking history. There's nothing you can do about that. Like, how you try? It's still gonna be there. History is history. That's why it's called history. Either way, they're gonna find out about it. Whether you take it all out the school system or not, it's still gonna be there. The outrageousness of it all is sickening. But they will do anything to win an election. I don't think that's going to be really popular. He's already being sued for the very thing that he's doing, and he stands his ass up there like he gives a shit about anything and talking about truth and defamation. And really? Oh, well, I'm shocked. Not really. I am not shocked. I am not shocked at all. So, I'm just going to find some clips that I was interested in. For the most part, it is... Okay. Let me go here. There's some things I wanted to, that I either thought was funny or I thought was interesting. And this is what I do in the mornings before I get my day started. Just crash my whole soul watching the news and what the Congress is doing, what these politicians are doing, what kind of bullshit they in. Because mostly, I mean, like, it's all, they're fucking criminals. Okay, so we're going to watch Marjorie Taylor Greene get blasted for her. I mean, these people are they're not intelligent at all. Like, I'm wondering, like, where the fuck do they come from? And how the hell do they get to be representatives? How do they get in Congress? It's amazing to me. I'm like, well, now, I think I'm going to run for fucking president. Like, shit, for real. Maybe a congresswoman, you know, like, I think that in order to run for president, it should be a law that you at least have a couple courses in political science. You know, a little governing skills. You know, I mean, like, because it is really weird. So, here's Raskins. He's going to grill Marjorie Taylor Greene. And listen to this whack-ass bitch. She is a conspiracy theorist, and she's sitting there. She sounds stupid as hell. But anybody in the right frame of mind would know she is not a fit person to be representing 75,000 fucking people. She's a whack job. A fucking whack job. So, let's see if we can... God damn it, this is unbelievable. So, let's start here. Here she is. Marjorie Dumbass Greene. Conspiracy theorist. unhinged
Take a
piece
I'd
of
like
shit.
parliamentarian to rule.
Okay, so we're gonna start it from
Point of
here.
personal privilege, we're mentioning my name, Mr. Raskin.
You know, I understand, but that's not the rule, Ms. Green. I don't think a member.
That is the rule.
God, that's
of
kind of
Congress.
dark.
Then I'd like
We could take a
I'd
point
like
of personal
parliamentarian to
privilege.
rule on whether any member of this committee has the right to interrupt a witness's testimony because they mentioned the name of a member of Congress.
I didn't think any entity should enforce a non-FDA approved vaccine
She's
or
so
mask.
fucking stupid.
Guess what? A lot of people agreed with me, but you called that COVID misinformation.
I want to say, my colleagues, don't worry. There's still many platforms you can spread this information on. Parler, Truth Social, that have questionable editorial policies, but aren't here today.
The gentlelady from Georgia was suspended from Twitter for knowingly and consistently spreading conspiracy theories about COVID-19 vaccine, right? Which is shameful. Shameful, especially in a pandemic where million people have lost their lives.
You can consider your speech canceled during my time because you canceled mine. You see,
My
my personal Twitter account.
Her personal
and it was
Twitter
my campaign
account.
account also. So let's talk about election interference, shall we?
Listen
Guess
to
what?
this crackpot
None of you hold
bitch.
security clearances. None of you are elected, and none of you represent 750,000 people like I do. These were doctors that were trying to tell the truth about COVID. Doctors that were having success treating people with ivermectin.
They were
that you all
crackpot
were not allowed
doctors.
to be talked about on your platform. On Twitter, people can question elections such as 2016, saying Hillary won, but in 2020, no one could question elections saying Trump won. You were censoring and wrongfully violating our First Amendment free speech rights. You argued that minors should have access to Grindr, an adult male gay.
She's
hookup
lying.
app.
My Republican colleagues would have folks believe that Democrats are preparing for some sort of major culture war. And there's a difference between a culture war and how culture naturally changes. The reality is that culture changes, it adopts, it welcomes more people, it becomes more understanding, and it also decides to reassess what's acceptable behavior and rhetoric. It could be different now than it was in, say, the 1950s. In this supposed culture war, they often conflate the right to free speech with the non-existent right to not be criticized or held accountable for what you say on the internet or even in real life. And just because it's legal to say something and the government won't throw you in jail for it, doesn't mean the rest of the world, and sometimes even your own family, have to associate themselves with you or your comments.
Mr. Roth, please explain to us why Miss Marjorie Taylor Greene, or the representative from Georgia, was removed from Twitter.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. My recollection is that her personal account was banned from Twitter after repeated written notices due to repeated violations of the Twitter rules.
Can you add a little specificity to the violation of the Twitter rules?
Yes. Again, I didn't have access to my Twitter email, documents, anything that would have let me prepare to answer that in more detail, but my recollection is that the Congresswoman repeatedly violated Twitter's policies about sharing misinformation about COVID-19. She received multiple written warnings about that conduct. She received multiple timeouts related to that conduct. And then ultimately, consistent with the written and published policy, those repeated violations resulted in her account being permanently suspended.
Mr. Chairman,
So in essence,
I'd like to make a point of personal privilege.
it's still my time.
We'll stop
Still my
clock.
It's my time.
Chairman.
The
Point of
reason
order
why-
by Mr. Raskin.
Yeah, I don't believe that members of this committee have the right to interrupt someone's testimony because they're
Point
named
of personal privilege. You mentioned my name, Mr. Raskin.
Yeah, I'm not testifying.
Chair recognizes Ms. Green.
Thank you.
She is
For
so
your point of privilege,
stupid.
very briefly.
Thank you. For Mr. Roth, who made you in charge of what is true and what's false?
Did she get the open
That we'll go back to Mr. Gomez, and Mr. Gomez, please remember that
That
the
crazy
decorum
bitch
the
is out of
committee.
control. Oh my God. This bitch is a wildfire. They put this bitch on a subcommittee, and all she's been doing and focusing on is herself. Oh, you people, you people cut my ass. You people did this. She is a nut job for real. Unbelievable
Lawyer
shit.
Evan Corcoran has now testified
I be
before
wondering what the
criminal
fuck.
grand jury
Where
that
these
is
people come
impaneled
from?
in
How do
Washington,
they let
D.C.,
them be in
which is
Congress?
investigating Donald Trump's theft
Okay,
of
now
the
we got
thousands
the
of
Frumpty
government
Dumpty is a
records,
they're
including
getting closer and
classified
closer to
records,
indicting him.
top secret,
I
as
know
well
he's
as
scared
sensitive
shitless.
compartmented information. This is one of the two major criminal investigations that special counsel Jack Smith is leading, and Evan Corcoran's testimony
Uh-oh,
here
y'all.
is pivotal.
We had a fall.
Again, it shows that special counsel very intertwined in Donald Trump's theft, concealment, and obstruction of justice of these government records that Donald Trump stole. First, Evan Corcoran was and is still the main lawyer for Donald Trump that has been dealing with communications with the government regarding Donald Trump's theft of these records. Specifically, even going back to late 2021 and 2022, specifically
y'all.
in January
Let me get
of
this
2022.
together.
Remember when Donald Trump gave back the National Archives like 15 boxes, and then it turned out that intermingled within the newspaper clippings and other things, like Donald Trump there was like 200 classified records there, including sensitive compartmented information there. Well, Evan Corcoran was responsible for working with the National Archives and the Department of Justice in and around that time. And one of the things that the FBI
I'm having
was focused on
difficulties
is they were
holding
like, it
this
seems
shit
as if Evan
down.
Corcoran, this lawyer for Trump, is just completely lying to us. Evan Corcoran continued to work with Donald Trump and communicate with the archives, and then when the referral was made, of course, to the Department of Justice throughout 2022, Evan Corcoran was the one who really was tasked as the lead lawyer to respond to the grand jury subpoena from the criminal grand jury in Washington, D.C. to return the classified records, to return all of the government records. That was sent out in May of 2022. And what you may recall is that the Department of Justice top counterintelligence officials then arranged a meeting. The meeting was arranged with Evan Corcoran. Christina Bobb was ultimately there as well, who's one of Trump's lawyers, although in this specific situation, she claims that she wasn't acting
Yeah, she
as his
passed
lawyer, but
out
his custodian of records, which doesn't really
when
make
the
any
judge
sense to me,
hit
but
them with
very little in
sanctions.
Trump world makes sense to me. But in
Almost $1
response
million
to this
for
May
frivolous
subpoena,
lawsuits they
Corcoran
was
didn't file any
continuously
objections.
filing.
They didn't assert, any privileges at the time. What they did was they returned a red weld folder. Those are those legal folders. Met with a Department of Justice official, and in that was more classified records.
Damn.
And Christina Bobb signed an attestation, and she said that after a diligent search was conducted,
She lied.
these are all of the records that exist. There are no more government records
She
at all
lied.
at Mar-a-Lago or anywhere on any of Trump's properties. She said that, again, a diligent search had been done. It's all in this red weld folder, so there's nothing else to see here. Returned it over to the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice then realized that that was a lie. One of the things we've learned as well, though, from Christina Bobb, she wanted to include language in her attestation to the Department of Justice and to the FBI that it was based upon information told to her. She wanted to add that language because the attestation originally said, based on a diligent search of the property, here are all of the records that we've been able to locate. No other records exist. She never actually searched the residence. So she wanted language in there that said, based on what was told to me. So who told that to her? Evan Corcoran. So on behalf of Donald Trump, Evan Corcoran forced it's probably not all that hard to force Christina Bobb to sell her soul to Donald Trump and implicate
Exactly.
herself in serious criminal conspiracies hurting our national security for Donald Trump.
Ooh,
based
that
on
coffee was
her
good, y'all.
cult-like weird fascist devotion to him. But she got that request from Evan Corcoran. Hey, you need to do this declaration, because Corcoran didn't want to sign his name to it, so he had her do it as the custodian of records. She at least had the wherewithal to say, based upon the information that was told to me, it was Corcoran who told that to her, and it was obviously Corcoran who was lying after this June of 2022 interaction between Bob and Christina Bobb and the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice continues to work their sources within Mar-a-Lago. They get security camera footage within Mar-a-Lago. They are aware with a great degree of confidence that Donald Trump is still continuing to hide classified records, and that his legal team of Corcoran and Bobb are just straight up lying to the FBI. Another way of saying lying is committing perjury to the FBI, or another way of saying it is that Corcoran and Bobb appear to have been themselves committing obstruction of justice with the validly issued subpoena by the Department of Justice and by the with regards to the Department of Justice's investigation. So then, of course, a search warrant is executed at Mar-a-Lago. Search warrant is executed August 8th. The search warrant was signed by the magistrate judge on August 5th, and of course they find tens of thousands of other records at Mar-a-Lago, completely contrary to what Evan Corcoran and Christina Bobb had told the Department of Justice, as well as over 100 classified records, again, including sensitive compartmented information. You know, they also found a lot of these, in addition to the 100 or so classified records, they found all these folders that have these classified markings on them. They have all these classified markings on them, and the contents of the folders themselves were empty. And so, look, Evan Corcoran's right in the heart of the obstruction of justice. So already we know the Department of Justice had previously met with Christina Bobb twice. They met with her twice because she had lied to them, and she faces criminal liability and exposure. And when we did the breaking news hits here on the Midas Touch Network to discuss Christina Bobb meeting with the FBI, we said it's likely that she's going to point the finger at Evan Corcoran, because Corcoran was the one who told her, sign the declaration lying to the FBI to cover up for Donald Trump. She was the fall person, and she's, I guess, willing to be a fall person. They can't even say it's unwittingly. So that's why Evan Corcoran here is so vital, is so key to all of this. And I think Evan Corcoran faces legal exposure. Now, one of the things you may be asking is, well, he's a lawyer, so is there attorney-client privilege that would apply here? There may be, in certain circumstances, attorney-client privilege that apply with his communications with Donald Trump. To determine whether there is what's called a crime fraud exception to attorney-client privilege. Just remember, attorney-client privilege means that the communications that take place between a client and their lawyer are confidential, and the government's not allowed to get it, private citizens aren't allowed to get at it, unless the client, who's the holder of the privilege, waives the privilege. One of the ways you can waive the privilege is by talking about what you have these private discussions with your lawyer to the public. If you make these private conversations public, then you waive the privilege. It's just one way. There are also exceptions to the privilege, and one of the exceptions to the privilege, there's very few exceptions to the privilege, but one is the crime fraud exception. For example, you may recall that the federal district court judge, David Carter, in the John Eastman lawsuit, where Eastman was trying to stop the January 6th committee from getting his emails and his text messages relating to the January 6th insurrection, Judge David Carter found that although there was an attorney-client relationship between John Eastman and Donald Trump, the crime fraud exception applied to certain documents, certain emails, certain text messages. And therefore, those documents and emails would be turned over to the January 6th committee. And by the way, we've talked about those here. Those are quite incriminating. So here, with respect to Evan Corcoran, the same type of crime fraud exception analysis with Donald Trump would apply as it relates to their communications. And it's a two-step inquiry. Number one is, was there more likely than not a crime that's been committed? And here I think the answer is absolutely yes. Obstruction of justice, Espionage Act, concealment and mutilation. These are precisely the claims that were in the August 8th search warrant that was executed at Mar-a-Lago. And then the next inquiry is whether the communications at issue, whether it's oral communications or documents, emails, text messages, whatever, were those in furtherance of the criminal conduct. And if both factors are there, then that is information that is discoverable in criminal proceedings as well as civil proceedings. And so this is the crime fraud exception. But the Department of Justice doesn't even have to go there, because they could be asking Corcoran a lot of questions just about